This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Africa pushes for 2 permanent seats at the UN Security Council as the UN General Assembly debate begins. Mali's junta leader says it is a new start for the country as the interim president takes over. And Uganda announces the reopening of schools for final year students despite a spike in COVID-19 cases. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. Conflicting reports concerning TikTok's American operations make a likely deal precarious. And in sports, Uganda's Joshua Cheptegei eyeing the 10,000 meters after setting the 5,000-meter world record. In your top story this hour, China's President Xi Jinping has said China will continue to be a true follower of multilateralism and will stay actively engaged in reforming and developing the global governance system. In a video message addressed to the high-level meeting to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, Xi gave 4 proposals as ways for the world to face new challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic.
联合国要主持公道。 大小国家相互尊重、一律平等，是时代进步的要求，也是联合国宪章首要原则。要坚持共商共建共享，由各国共同维护普遍安全，分享发展成果，掌握世界命运。 要切实提高发展中国家在联合国的代表性和发言权，更加平衡地反映大多数国家利益和意愿。要厉行法治，毫不动摇维护联合国宪章宗旨和原则，以制度和规则协调各国关系和利益。要促进合作。 把本国利益同各国共同利益结合起来，建设和谐合作的国际大家庭。要聚焦行动，以解决问题为出发点，平衡推进安全、发展、人权，把发展问题置于全球宏观框架突出位置。
Well, for more on this, let's now speak to Matthias Mwindi, an independent political analyst. He joins us from Nairobi. Matthias, in that video message, Chinese President Xi Jinping reaffirmed China's commitment to multilateralism. Now, given the unprecedented challenges the world is facing, how has this message resonated with African leaders?
It is a very timely message by the Chinese president at this time of the UN's General Assembly. Because the world at the moment is facing 2 major challenges, the COVID pandemic and the rise of what we can term economic protectionism. So for the Chinese president to call for multilateralism and a global cooperation, it is something which is, which rhymes with African countries. When you look at the position taken by the current head of the African Union, South African president, is also calling for global cooperation against the pandemic and other issues of global concern. And that is going to be the theme which the South African president is going to dwell on when he gives his speech to the UN General Assembly later today. So the speech by President Xi is something which the African leaders, the 54 leaders of Africa, are going to have welcomed, and they are going to use that theme in their address, which is going to be given by the South African leader later today.
Now, Matthias, President Xi also said that the voice of developing countries needs to be increased within the United Nations. But how can African countries not only amplify their voices, but their influence too within the UN?
President Xi is the first leader in the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council during this year's summit to call for a greater voice for developing countries in the UN. So that is something the African leaders, led by the 3 members of the UN Security Council, are going to try to use to try to influence the agenda of, which is debated by the UN Security Council, whether it's the debates which are going to come for debates, whether it's the votes which are going to take place. It is also going to be a stepping stone for Africa's push for the radical restructuring of the global institutions. African countries have been pushing to have a permanent seat among the, within the UN Security Council. So they will take the message coming from the president, the Chinese president, as a cue in which they will persist in pushing for that restructuring of the UN, trying to get that seat, and also to influence the outcome which comes from the debates from the UN Security Council. So the speech is timely for African leaders, especially in trying to influence the UN Security Council to pass resolutions which positively impact on Africa. This is especially considering that almost 50% of the output of UN activities, whether it's resolutions, whether it's through deployments, whether it's funding operations, most of them tend to concern Africa.
Matthias Mwindi, thank you so much, the independent political analyst joining us here in Nairobi. Well, staying with the question of the African agenda at the United Nations, South Sudan is supporting the African Union's call for 2 permanent seats for Africa at the UN Security Council. The Security Council is made up of 5 permanent members, and only they have the right to veto decisions and block declarations they don't agree with. South Sudanese President Salva Kiir is among the voices calling for reform.
75 years since the founding of the United Nations, the geopolitical realities in the world have changed, and UN Security Council remains the same. This situation cannot remain the same any longer, and that is why I am adding my voice to the demand by the African Union for 2 permanent members, permanent seats in the Security Council. Africans demand this because we are the most affected by the Council's decisions and resolutions.
Well, as the United Nations marks its 75th anniversary, nations are battling a coronavirus pandemic that has deepened poverty and hunger, fueled populism and xenophobia, and widened divisions among the world's great powers. Let's take a look now at how the UN has fared in its promise to uphold international peace and security, and how it's holding up against mounting odds today. Here's Liling Tan with that report.
The year was 1945.
More than 80% of humanity.
The place, San Francisco.
All at war when the conference was begun.
The goal? To avoid another world war.
They came to design together machinery to end war, a curse which in 30 years had killed 40 million human beings.
Fast forward 75 years, and the good news is no World War III.
The UN deserves credit for helping avoid a major power war since 1945. And if you go back into history, the UN also played an enormous role in guiding decolonization in Africa, Asia, and other parts of the world.
Certainly in terms of humanitarian protection and humanitarian succor, humanitarian relief, the UN system is absolutely essential. When member states provide the troops, the equipments, and the mandate to do the job, peacekeepers and peace enforcers can be actually essential to keeping the peace or keeping a lid on a cauldron.
The bad news? We now face COVID-19, a planet in crisis, endless conflicts, and a UN under pressure and under fire.
If you look at climate change, a global pandemic, poverty, conflict, the fact that we have more than 80 million people at the moment displaced by persecution, conflict, and atrocities. All of these problems cannot be solved simply within a national context. They are problems that go beyond borders, and they require multilateral solutions.
With the annual high-level General Assembly now in session, here's what the UN Secretary-General wants from world leaders.
Leadership in the sense of a very strong commitment to fight together the COVID-19, very strong commitment to climate action, and very strong commitment to rebuild our economies and our societies in a way that is more inclusive, fighting inequality, fighting racism, with gender equality as a major concern.
The UN chief also wants a recommitment to multilateralism at a time of increasing division, when disagreements among nations and rivalries between superpowers are threatening to tear the world further apart.
We see that great superpower rivalries, with the United States supporting this protagonist, China supporting this one, Russia supporting that one. The net effect of that is to cause the gears of international diplomacy to grind to a halt.
There is a risk that tensions between Beijing and the US will stop many UN agencies working effectively, and that power politics will poison the work of the UN system, including in poor countries which need the UN's help.
In any normal year, the UN General Assembly is a venue for nations to narrow these divides, an opportunity for world leaders to meet behind closed doors, smooth over differences, and try to solve the world's problems together. This year, however, because of the pandemic and the virtual format, world leaders will not actually be physically present, which puts a damper on what can actually be accomplished here as the UN turns 75. Li Lingtan, CGTN, New York.
Well, turning to Sudan-US relations now, a delegation from Sudan's Sovereign Council is set to meet those from the United States and the United Arab Emirates. The three sides are to discuss removing Sudan from a US list of state sponsors of terrorism. The Council's chairman, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, left Sudan on Sunday for a two-day visit to the UAE. Now, the US sanctioned Sudan over its alleged support of militant groups and the civil war in Darfur during Omar al-Bashir's rule. Trade sanctions were lifted in 2017, but Sudan remains on the state sponsors of terrorism list, which prevents it from accessing much-needed funding from international lenders. Well, let's bring you more on this now. CGTN's Jacob Greaves is following developments from Dubai and joins us now live. Jacob, considering that there are certain criteria one imagines that Sudan must meet before being removed from this list, what might be some of the major talking points at this meeting?
Well, as you mentioned there, the key one from Sudan's point of view will be any decision on removing the country from the US list of state sponsors of terrorism. Sudanese officials are set to raise this issue with their American counterparts, whilst here in the UAE, if that were a decision taken, it would make it easier for Sudan's transitional government to access foreign loans as it tries to weather an economic crisis. Inflation in Sudan hit almost 170% last month. However, there's been little official indication here from the American side that might be agreed upon at these talks. Sudanese officials are also pushing for what they've called the writing off of American debts on Sudan, but any such deal might come with strings attached. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Sudan last month, and back then he raised the issue of Sudan establishing ties with Israel. Now, at the time, Sudan's Prime Minister said he didn't have the mandate to do that. However, since then, we've had the UAE and Bahrain officially normalising ties with Israel, and US President Donald Trump saying he expects other Arab states to follow suit. Leading into these talks, there's also been rife media speculation there will be a decisive meeting on the issue of Israeli-Sudanese normalisation. But that's something that hasn't been officially confirmed by either side, and at this stage is just speculation. However, any such deal would unleash the economic aid Sudan needs likely. We might also see further aid from the UAE emerging from these talks. Over the past year, the UAE has pledged food and financial support, and in June offering $50 million for economic growth initiatives in collaboration with the World Bank. Sudanese officials in Abu Dhabi today will likely hope this ends in more such contributions.
Thank you so much, Jacob Greaves, live with us there from Dubai. Now, Mali's junta leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, says Mali is at the beginning of a new era for growth. Goïta also announced former defense minister and retired Colonel Ba Ndao has been appointed the country's interim president. Goïta himself will be stepping into the role of vice president. The two were appointed on Monday by a group of electors chosen by the junta. The junta has come under pressure from its West African neighbours to return power to civilians. This after the military group seized power in a coup last month that toppled President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. Last week, West African leaders insisted that an interim president must be a civilian, signalling they would accept a soldier as vice president. The new interim president will now lead the country for 18 months before elections are held.
In 2020 again, insecurity prevails. On a large part of the national territory, the security forces fight bravely. But loop-sided wars, as we all know, are difficult to win and are won with time, determination and resilience. I want to make you the promise that we will win the war that has been imposed on us. Let's place this celebration under the sign of a new beginning, new opportunities that we are giving ourselves to make Mali grow in confidence, regain social cohesion and solidarity. Change is now.
Let's now hear what a cross-section of Malians are saying about the appointment of the interim president and his deputy.
I would have liked us to choose a politician, because Mali has been a democracy for almost 25 years. I think they are major actors who have the vision, the experience, and who really have the vigor to lead this transition. But it's a pity what we've seen.
I am very happy that it is purely apolitical. He is also a career soldier, several times chief of staff, and has held high positions in the army. The fact that he studied in Russia opens the way to Russia too.
I think that there is basically no man for the situation in the country. There are men who can do things. There are personalities who are less divisive. And I think he is one of the least divisive personalities in the country. But really, the situation can only be resolved through a national awakening. Therefore, it will not be the president of the transition alone, but all the Malian political, civil and military actors to bring this situation to a successful conclusion.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Uganda announces the reopening of schools for final year students despite a spike in COVID-19 cases. And as the world marks Rhino Day, we take a look at the challenges of conserving the black rhino in Africa. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Ugandan police have detained 2 security officers on suspicion of negligence as an investigation into a fire at Makerere University continues. The university is the country's oldest and largest tertiary institution. A security team has also retrieved footage from surveillance cameras to find out if there was any foul play. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga has that report.
This is the symbol of Makerere University, one of Africa's top learning institutions. The fire brigade team has managed to contain the blaze, which began on Saturday. It is now looking into the possibility of a security lapse.
So far we have one police officer in custody who was supposed to be on duty. He claims that he was on duty, but according to the interrogation so far, he had absconded duty. We also have a private security guard who was asleep in the sentry.
The fire destroyed the top floor, which holds students and finance records. This place has been sealed off as a crime scene. Authorities here say they are investigating the cause of the fire. But for the students and alumni, the main worry is about the academic documents.
Most of the files were being relocated to the main building, which means that most of the files were burned. Remember, there are receipts within the financial offices, there are receipts within the academic registrars, and those papers of a program.
But the university authorities say most of this information had been captured electronically.
We have a lot of that information already in a digital form. And whatever was lost, we can recover from the many copies that are all over the university.
The university boasts of being a center of excellence in the region. Former African presidents like the late Julius Nyerere, Milton Obote, Benjamin Mkapa, and Mwai Kibaki acquired their degrees from this institution. The building with its British architectural design was completed in 1941. Makerere University is due to celebrate its 100th anniversary next year. Hilary Isiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
While staying in Uganda, authorities have announced the reopening of schools for final year students, this despite a spike in COVID-19 cases. At the start of the pandemic, Uganda maintained strict lockdown measures and low cases. As restrictions have been eased, there has now been an increase in infections. CGTN's Isabel Nakiria has more.
At least 1.2 million Ugandan students are expected to report back to school on October 15th. University and college students in their final years of study will also be allowed back on the same date. The Ugandan president says with a smaller number in school, social distancing will be easier to maintain.
Number one, we think that it is safe because the finalists in each learning institution are a much smaller number compared to the total enrollment in this center.
The government will consider reopening schools to other year groups in January 2021. The international airport and borders have also been allowed to reopen on 1st October. Visitors coming in will have to present a negative COVID-19 result taken 72 hours before. This will apply to Ugandans coming back into the country as well. The government says there will be no need for quarantine so long as the visitors go straight to their hotels and don't interact with nationals.
The tourists will be driven straight from the airport to their destinations or to designated transit hotels that are set aside for that purpose. Business delegations should also be handled in the same way by local partners.
The president has instructed churches to reopen, but with a capacity of only 70 people. Night prayers will not go on for now. Outdoor sporting activities have been allowed to take place, but players will have to undergo COVID-19 tests every 2 weeks. The government, though, is keeping in place curfew measures and maintaining the closure of casinos and bars for now. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
It is World Rhino Day, and while Africa's black rhino population has been rising over the years, the species remains endangered as poaching and demand for their horns persist. Between 2012 and 2018, the black rhino population grew at an annual rate of 2.5%, an increase of nearly 800 rhinos in the wild. Conservationists are warning that rhinos remain under threat, though, and there will be a decrease in the growth rate of the rhino population over the next 5 years. This, according to population models. Let's bring you some perspective on this. We're now joined by Kadukiwe Sebunya, the Chief Executive Officer of the African Wildlife Foundation. He joins us via Skype. Kadu, many countries across the globe have strict laws to protect the rhino, and yet black rhino populations are still under threat. What is the missing link here?
The missing link is really the demand. We've seen that demand of rhino horn products is the biggest problem of all. And so long as the market exists, then the increasing demand will be met. This sets a persistent threat to poaching. But also there are other issues. There are limited secure and suitable habitat, the rhinos. Most habitats are parks that are huge and require huge investments in law enforcement and their management. Some of the parks are larger than some countries in Europe. That's why we invest in supporting creation of rhino sanctuaries that are within the parks with the special protection and management. The third issue I'll mention is high protection costs. In many cases, poachers are more equipped than the rangers that protect wildlife. It's a huge cost to governments to match the level of investments required to fend off the bad guys. And lastly, sometimes it's inadequate support policies, legislative and strategic frameworks that governments both depend on to the supply countries and the demand countries. Just an example, we saw what happened when China changed its policy and banned ivory trade. It decreased the price and the demand by almost 70%. And when we've seen where we work, where African governments implement better policies and laws, there is a decline in poaching in many of these areas.
And so, Kadu, what do you think then should be the priority areas of focus for African countries, conservationists and scientists if we are ever to return the black rhino population to acceptable numbers across Africa?
It's imperative that the governments and non-government organizations that work with the governments and other environmental groups collaborate to conserve African rhinos. Not only collaborating among ourselves, we need to grow the tent to include other people, whether the economists, the business planners, rural development planners, social development colleagues, to come and help us develop better strategies. As COVID has shown us, this is not only a conservation challenge, it's also an economic challenge. We need to strengthen protected area networks. We need to eradicate the illegal trade of rhinos by increasing our law enforcement, increasing the monitoring of our outlets, ports and airports, collaboration through international legal frameworks to deal with the demand countries of our wildlife. But of course, we need to crack down on the poaching that is mostly found in our communities, not because they want, but because of their levels of poverty that we need to address through our economic development plans.
And of course, this year's World Rhino Day comes right in the middle of a global pandemic when tourist revenues are extremely low. Kadu, how has this affected funding for conservation and awareness programs as well as research?
The impact of COVID has been significant, with over 24 million people in Africa directly and indirectly losing their incomes and sources of livelihoods. Majority of our national parks where these rhinos are found are funded to a tune of over 50% of their revenue from tourism. Some of the rhinos, especially black rhinos, are found in sanctuaries that are 100% funded by the tourism industry. So, and the loss of employment, and this includes frontline rangers, the scouts, community leaders, and tourism entrepreneurs who have been supporting a lot of our law enforcement and protected area management. But through strategic and targeted support, we can see the turnaround. And actually, COVID has had some positive elements to it. They've shown us that tourism is a big part of our healthy programs because they fund a lot of conservation. And it has taught us that conservation is not only about wildlife, but about our existence as a people. But also, the most important, COVID has shown us that the world is flat. A spike in China has shut down Nairobi, Lagos, Joburg. So the world is flat, and we need to do this with a global effort.
Thank you so much, Kadukiwa Sebonia, the Chief Executive Officer for the Africa Wildlife Foundation, joining us there via Skype. Now, authorities in Botswana say toxins produced by a particular bacteria in water were behind the recent deaths of more than 300 elephants. Other animals in the Okavango Panhandle region appeared to have been unharmed. Botswana is home to almost a third of Africa's elephants. The cyanobacteria are microscopic organisms common in water and sometimes found in soil. Not all produce toxins, but scientists say the toxic ones are occurring more frequently as climate change drives up global temperatures. Two South African women are trying to strengthen the country's fight against gender-based violence. Nikita Delwaria and Chloe Homer developed a safe space after 19-year-old university student Uyanene Mtongana was raped and bludgeoned to death in a post office last year. The initiative also teaches women self-defense techniques. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Unene's brutal killing in a South African post office in August 2019 sparked nationwide protests. It prompted Nikita Delwaria and Chloe Homer to start Safe Space to protect women inside and outside their homes.
What we endeavour to do is to create a holistic system that builds women up in your mind, within your home, as well as in public spaces. So you would log an incident of gender-based violence, and other women would be able to check on the website based on, like you would use Google Maps or Waze before you're going anywhere, to kind of check sort of what hotspots there are, so that you could either avoid them or just be extra cautious about your surroundings.
Data is collected and used to make areas safer, but sadly most abuse happens at home with intimate partners and has worsened during the COVID-19 lockdown.
So we have seen a drastic increase in reported incidents of gender-based violence, but what we also don't understand and can fully comprehend is how many incidents have gone unreported. And that's because people either haven't been able to leave their home during the hard lockdown, level 5 and most of level 4, and luckily level 3 and level 2 has been a saving grace for a lot of people. They've been able to go to work, they've been able to leave their homes.
Safe Space is working with business, local government and communities to help women who have nowhere else to turn.
We have resources of self-defense. We have resources of having to have women be more financially astute, teaching women the importance of saving, teaching women the importance of kind of knowing your surroundings, knowing the triggers, knowing your psychological triggers with your perpetrator. So you're feeling automatically safer within your home, even though you're stuck in your home with this monster.
The bills passed in Parliament around gender-based violence have given us some light at the end of the tunnel. But again, legislation at the top really isn't doing what we need it to do, and we really need to approach gender-based violence from a grassroots level, and that involves addressing the cultural norms, addressing what society accepts, addressing the idea of being a bystander.
Women say they find themselves under threat every day in South Africa and that at least a third have lived through gender-based violence. Safe Space is one of many platforms working to end this nightmare. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Heavy rains that have pounded Senegal since the beginning of this month have led to significant flooding. In the capital city of Dakar, young people have found a new business opportunity, transporting people and goods on makeshift rafts. CGTN's Joy Kiruki has those details.
Kir Massar, located in the suburbs of Dakar, is one of the most flood-affected areas. With roads submerged, residents have been trapped. A new business has sprung up of makeshift rafts transporting people and their belongings.
My real job is an electrician, but since the start of the pandemic, I stopped working. When our neighborhood was flooded, I made this raft. I carry 2 people with it. Now I transport all my neighbors for free, but the people I don't know pay me for the crossing. Often, it's very dangerous. The water level reaches up to my throat.
Babacar Diop says he earns just an average of $9 per day for the services he provides.
It's not only about money, you know. Money is good, but I think it's important to support your neighbor, to help each other between human beings.
I lost a lot. Here, I had a food store. The whole store is completely submerged now. I'm trying to save the few goods. Fortunately, I can count on the raft drivers. Without their help, it's just been impossible to transport all that.
In response to these heavy floods, Senegal's President Macky Sall has launched a national relief plan. But in the meantime, Babacar will continue to transport people on his makeshift raft. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
And coming up in your business news up next. Conflicting reports concerning TikTok's American operations make a likely deal precarious. And Ghana's gold royalty fund to seek a listing at the London Stock Exchange.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
We start with the future of TikTok in the United States. Conflicting reports are making an agreement concerning the app's American operations seem precarious. The multi-billion-dollar deal was supposed to calm Washington's security concerns, but TikTok's owner ByteDance, potential partner Oracle, and President Donald Trump are disputing the details. Jim Spellman reports.
The deal to spin off TikTok into a new U.S.-based company appears to be very much in flux. The deal calls for Oracle, along with Walmart, to become the, quote, trusted tech partner of TikTok, with a new company known as TikTok Global to be formed and based in the United States. An initial proposal called for TikTok's parent company ByteDance to retain control of the new entity, with Oracle and Walmart taking minority stakes and Oracle hosting U.S. data. A revised deal emerged that saw Oracle and other U.S. interests controlling a majority stake of TikTok Global. U.S. President gave tentative approval to that version of the deal. But in a statement Monday, ByteDance seemed to indicate it will retain 80% control of TikTok Global, at least until the new company can be taken public. Trump is threatening to reject such a deal, telling Fox News, quote, if we find that they, Oracle, don't have total control, then we're not going to approve the deal. Adding to the confusion, Oracle seems to contradict ByteDance, saying the Chinese tech giant, quote, will have no ownership in TikTok Global. Any deal needs approval from Washington and Beijing. TikTok was slated to be removed from Apple and Google's app stores at the end of the day Sunday, but with talks seeming to make progress, that deadline for TikTok was extended a week, buying U.S. users at least a short reprieve. Meantime, WeChat has been given a reprieve of its own, a court in the U.S. halting, for now, the Trump administration's plan to ban downloads of the Chinese app in the United States. The Trump administration is fighting the court's order. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Bethesda, Maryland.
A cache of over 2,000 leaked documents shows that global banks have transferred more than $2 trillion in allegedly illegal funds over nearly 2 decades. In defense, banks say they have complied with all regulations. But the shadow of misconduct remains, and some banking shares have fallen to 25-year lows following that report. Naveed Jabakil has more from London.
Some of the biggest names in banking facing another scandal. A series of leaked reports allege global banks were involved in moving dirty money around the world, in some cases for criminals. The so-called FinCEN files include more than 2,500 documents, most of which were sent to US authorities by banks to highlight potentially shady activity. They centre on suspicious activity reports, or SARs, which banks have to file to notify law enforcement of suspicious transactions. That could include things like money laundering, fraud and corruption, terror financing, or violating sanctions. They aren't proof of any crime or wrongdoing, but are supposed to act as a red flag. In total, the documents, which were obtained by BuzzFeed News, showed more than $2 trillion of such transactions took place between 1999 and 2017. Some international lenders appeared most often in the reports, including HSBC, Standard Chartered, JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank.
We are taking the fight against money laundering and against flight of capital very, very seriously. We are closely cooperating with criminal investigation authorities, just like other banks. What's being reported now is not new, not to us and not to our supervisory authority.
HSBC also said the files were historical and that it's embarked on a multi-year journey to overhaul its ability to combat financial crime. Standard Chartered said it takes its responsibility to fight financial crime extremely seriously and has invested substantially in its compliance programs. And American bank JP Morgan said it's devoted thousands of employees and hundreds of millions of dollars to help fight financial crime.
These files cover a wide range of alleged criminal activity and are highly sensitive and confidential, which is why US officials say the unauthorized leak is a national security concern. But the reports do highlight the worries among US authorities about the UK's role in how dirty money is moved around. More than 3,000 British companies were named in the FinCEN files, more than any other country, with London's banking hub described as a weak link in the global financial system. Naweed Jabakil, CGTN, London.
Ghana is planning to list its gold royalty fund in London in October in a deal expected to be worth up to $500 million. The government-backed Agapa Royalties has hired Bank of America and JP Morgan to pursue an initial public offering on the London Stock Exchange. Africa's largest gold producer wants to take advantage of the good prices this year to raise the money if the plan does not run into political opposition. Agapa holds interests including mining royalties in Ghana's gold assets. Royalties give a country the right to receive a percentage of production from mining operations or retain a stake in a mining company. Egypt's 5 biggest listed real estate firms have reported a combined profit fall of nearly 31% for the second quarter of this year. Now, this is a result of slowing property sales due to the coronavirus-induced economic crisis. However, there's optimism that the sector will recover by the end of 2020 or during the first half of next year if the country can avoid a second wave of infections. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the details.
The real estate sector is one of the driving forces in Egypt's economy, as it employs millions of workers. Real estate attracts huge investments to the country, not just from local investors, but also from the foreign investors who mainly come from the Gulf countries, and who are attracted by its high return. However, the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic that hit Egypt in March has had its effects on the contractors.
If we are talking about small developers, they had the most losses and a good number of them closed down or merged in the first half of the year. The large developers saw a 30% drop in profits, which is very good in these circumstances. The medium-sized companies lost an average of 50%. The working from home concept has led to catastrophic losses in the segment of administrative and office unit sales. You can't underestimate this segment. It was flourishing and more profitable than residential units.
To protect this vital industry, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi allowed developers to resume operations before the lockdown was lifted. This is while the Central Bank of Egypt pumped billions of Egyptian pounds into the industry to keep it floating.
The state allocated a monthly salary to laborers who lost their jobs and income. These helped them survive the tough lockdown months. Banks were ordered to postpone all loan repayments on all construction companies for 6 months. This went a long way in helping many companies avoid bankruptcy.
Developers have had to come up with new sales facilities and marketing tools to survive the effects of the pandemic.
The two largest annual real estate fairs in the country were cancelled due to the coronavirus. The marketing team turned aggressively to social media as an alternative, using technology to develop online marketing strategies. The big developers offered up to 30% discounts for cash payments or longer repayment plan for installments. This hasn't pushed sales up much because in the midst of the COVID-19, most Egyptians don't want to spend. They prefer to wait a while.
Construction has steadily picked since the new measures were put in place, but the contraction in the industry still remains. This is despite the low number of daily coronavirus cases in Egypt currently being recorded. So how do experts view projections for the next period?
The virus hasn't disappeared, but the real estate will recover soon because it's viewed by Egyptian citizens as a safe investment. Many Egyptians don't buy units to live in them, but to invest because prices always go up. Despite all the crises in the past, unit prices have always increased at an average 10 to 15% per year.
The government is negotiating another emergency fund to support small contractors. But overall, most experts believe the building industry in Egypt will return to normality by mid-2021. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
A Tunisian startup has been praised for its role in developing affordable bionic artificial limbs. Since launching in 2018, Cure Bionics has been working on a product that has evolved from a mechanical prosthetic solution into a battery-powered and bionic solution that can be 3D printed. CGTN's Adnan Chouachi takes a closer look at the innovation.
27 years old, Mohammed Dawafi is the founder and CEO of Cure Bionics, a startup that develops and manufactures bionic hands and arms for people with disabilities. The electronics and embedded systems engineer from the prestigious École Nationale d'Ingénieurs de Sousse and his team are trying to change the lives of thousands of disabled and handicapped people in the North African country.
My startup Cure Bionics is empowering people with disabilities, focusing currently on people with limb differences, people who were born with no hands or got amputations. So we are empowering them with 3D printed bionic arms, also with physical rehabilitation solutions using virtual reality, gamification.
Cure Bionics offers many products and services at an affordable price to help thousands who are in need of the artificial limbs. The startup targets to win over the prosthetics market by offering competitive prices in both the domestic and international markets, where millions of people are in need of the life-changing products.
Starting from the price, it will be very competitive. We are talking about 1/3 or 1/4 of the cheapest one in the market. We are also talking about features that are empowering, like the customization of the prosthetic. Actually, the users will have the ability to customize their prosthetics using external covers that can be continuously changeable.
Many talented interns and engineers have joined the adventure, despite its limited financial resources and the daily technical challenges. This vibrant group is focused on innovation and scientific research.
The idea behind being a young engineer working for a cause, it all starts from a challenging ourselves at the first place, like believing in ourselves to do everything, and challenging the difficulties that everyone, and as youngs or people did not find jobs or whatever, make the challenge to make your own job, your own comfort zone, your own everything, like challenge the existence, the problems, and make it to yourself.
According to the startup founder, who has also been recently featured in the Forbes Middle East 30 and the 30 2020 edition, the idea behind the launch of Cure Bionics is closely linked to the noble cause of serving people with disabilities and facilitating their lives. The initiative shows the importance of technology in achieving life goals for disabled people. Mohammed and his team plan to conquer the North African market and to internationalize by selling their made-in-Tunisia products globally. The Tunisian startup, which was founded at the National School of Engineers of Sousse, will soon open a new research center at the Technopole of Sousse. عدنان شوشي CGTN Tunis.
And coming up in your sports news, up next. Uganda's Joshua Cheptegei eyeing the 10,000 meters after setting the 5,000 meter world record.